buzz this week and primarily the last 2 days has been PM Modi's visit to US. Prime Minister Narendra Modi reached New York and addressed the 76th UN General Assembly session. PM Modi arrived in Washington for a 3-day visit to the country on Wednesday, his first beyond neighborhood since the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic. The Prime Minister held bilateral meetings with US President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris here. He also met his Australian counterpart Scott Morrison and Japanese PM Yoshihide Suga. PM Modi also participated in the first in-person Quad meeting after COVID-19. He also held meetings with 5 global CEOs for potential investment in India on Thursday. Some of the key points from the summit were: must improve effectiveness, reliability to remain relevant. India to work with its global regional partners to evacuate Afghans. Prime Minister Narendra Modi ended his speech at the United Nations General Assembly on Saturday with a song written by Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore. The Sunday Club presents to you the insights of Modi's visit. Tune in with Kahali at 7 p.m. today to watch the exclusive session live with Professor Dipankar Sengupta, Mr. Advaita Kapadia and Mr. Surya, along with our host Advaita Kala.
Welcome to the Sunday Club. I'm delighted to be back again here with you on what has been a very exciting week. We've had the Prime Minister going on his first outside of the neighborhood visit, and it's tossed up some really interesting questions, queries, assumptions, possibilities for the future. And I'm joined today by an excellent panel and a lot of new faces. So it's great on the Sunday Club to be welcoming again experts, and some of them are joining us from other parts of the world to really get a perspective on what this present visit means for India. It's significant, it's important, it's come at a time when America needs friends, because frankly, last month after they pulled out of Afghanistan, the Biden administration in particular faced a lot of flack globally. So I think they found themselves on the back foot for the first time in a very long time. And of course, they had that fracas with France, which was out in the public domain. So this is a time when America needs friends. And the fact that Prime Minister Modi made this trip to the United States is significant. The oldest democracy, the youngest democracy, the largest democracy, coming together in what they say are shared values was a point that was made repeatedly. Some are suggesting that this was a jibe. Others are suggesting that this was just a reiteration of democratic values and the fact that the new world order, so to speak, is going to be between democracies and those that have other forms of government. And hence, a reiteration of democratic values is extremely important. Joining me this evening, I must start with Rajiv Nayan, IDSA, from that. Rajiv ji has joined us at the last minute, and I'm so excited because he's an international affairs expert and will add great value to this panel. In particular, he watches China very closely. Thank you, Rajiv ji. Professor Dipankar Sengupta is back. As you all are always want him back now, so he keeps coming back. It's as simple as that. And I'm always happy to have him here because he has such wide-ranging interests. And then there is Aadit Kapadia, who's joining us all the way from Houston. And he's seen the Modi mania during Howdy Modi a couple of years ago. And I just want to check back with Adit on what's it like on his side of the world with Modi's current visit. Adit also he's the founder actually of MyEnd. A lot of you online are familiar with MyEnd, based out of the US, that evaluates foreign affairs, government decisions, etc. online. And then there is Surya Kanegaonkar, who is joining us all the way from Europe. He travels a lot. So where are you right now, Surya?
I'm based in Switzerland at the moment. So yeah, that's it. I do travel around in Europe a bit and come to India as frequently as I can.
Thank you so much, Surya, for joining us for the first time again. We've been trying to get you on the Sunday Club for a while, so I'm really happy that we could
Thank you, Advaita.
finally make it happen. And Rajiv ji, let's start with you right away. How significant? I've seen some headlines, and they seem to be saying a landmark Modi trip. How significant was this trip? Is it really a landmark, or is it hyperbole? Could you let us know what you think?
No, no, definitely it was a very significant event and plus trip. Modi met some leaders bilaterally. He also attended a multilateral meeting called Quad. He addressed United Nations General Assembly, that is an organization, international organization considered to be an universal body. So plus he also met CEOs of some 5 important companies. And these 5 important companies are quite important, not only economically, commercially, but also strategically. These companies are important strategically because we know once we talk, and you also mentioned about me while introducing that I watch China a bit,
Yes, you do.
not much, but yeah, a bit. And China is challenging the world through its technology also, emerging technologies, plus its expansionist aggressive behavior. And China is also intruding everywhere. And one of the countries which Modi met was Qualcomm, and Qualcomm has got expertise in uh, not only digital technology but also semiconductor technology, which is going to be defining factor in international relations of tomorrow. Many times people believe, maybe right or wrong, that telecom world basically determines the global politics. And China, after challenging the Western world by just blocking the supply of rare earth materials, in fact, told the world, like, look, you are going to be stopped, I am going to be the leader. And it seems, or it is generally believed, thereafter the Western world took on China and they started blocking it. Then geotechnology took over geopolitics and geoeconomics, and they also started blocking whatever China could have acquired from all over the world, and those are called enabling technologies, and stopping its growth, stopping its technological growth. So India, in fact, also very quietly has Adobe or other countries, or you just wanted some more investment in India in real sector and other sectors. Plus, it also wanted emerging technologies married with our defense industry. So all these are very important, and many important statements were made. China was very rarely directly mentioned, but a great signal has been given to it. Like, look, watch, please check your aggressive behavior. We are coming together, and we all are fed up with your aggressive nature. So please watch out. That is the message which has come out of this meeting.
Professor Dipankar, do you think they should have mentioned China? But why did they? I know international diplomacy. They didn't want to make it an us versus them situation. But Professor Dipankar, do you think it was time to kind of take China's name? Maybe.
See, this isn't necessary. When you have an alliance which basically talks about a system which is rules based, then anybody who abides with these rules will be compatible with anybody who abide by rules, international rules, will be compatible with this organization. Indeed, will be welcomed by it. So the moment China also starts to behave according to institutional rules, norms, China will also be welcomed. So why target China? What you are trying to do is the following. What is unsaid, of course, is the following, that a member, one of the major 5 powers, has decided to take law into its own hands to do whatever it wants. In the face of that, an organization has come together, and it's not just security related, because nothing can be solely security. It has a lot of components to it, because each of these components are mutually self-reinforcing. For example, if you can talk about security, it's also economic cooperation that matters. Because if you are not economically viable, if your trade with one another isn't good, then China will pick you off one by one, by offering better deals or by making those necessary threats. Look, even at this point in time, if you look at each of the countries, then particularly India, how much does China import from India? You count the other countries, United States, Japan, Australia, and our imports from China will be greater than that. So this is the centrality of China in this particular grouping right now, whether we like it or not. But there's no point in mentioning China. What you have to do is to tell what you're going to do. What are you going to do? Establish a rules-based business. Can anybody in their right minds oppose it? No. What are you going to do? You're going to basically leverage your power together and push some technologies. Can anybody in his right mind oppose this? No, they cannot. So if you look at the wish list of the Quad, as mentioned in their earlier meetings, as well as now, there is no country which can say, I find this objectionable. And given the fact they cannot find it objectionable, and if we act on it, the problem that you think we are unwilling to state is greatly neutralized, I think that's good enough. So what has been stated, I think, is reasonable, unobjectionable, but what is important is it basically does what needs to be done. Just one addition. I think it is significant that Rajiv sir talked about that it being a significant visit. Whether it is landmark or not, we will come to know later if all the countries walk the talk. Look, there's a problem out here. This visit to United States is being done at a time when most members of the Quad are either diminished because of their recent actions or because they're on the back foot. For example, the United States has suffered humiliation in Afghanistan, and this humiliation primarily is of its own making. Under those circumstances, a lot of people would be receptive to listen to other voices. So, for example, when I look at the US media, I mean, Modi's visit isn't being played up as much as we are playing it up for understandable reasons. But there's also the other reason. If you look at the US media, it's divided. The one that are supporting the United States are pretty woke, and therefore any support, any from the US administration extolling what Modi says will not be seen kindly. And right now, given the fact the media that backs the Republicans are not going to support Biden in whatever it does. And therefore, you have this particular episode where Kamala Harris talks about what universities should be, democracies should be doing and not be doing, which is picked by some in our media, and to say, look, he got a talking to. The fact that she did not mention anything specific makes me wonder that when she was talking about democracies living up to their ideals, was she talking about the horrible transfer of power that took place in the United States earlier this year? Was she talking about the use of whips by border guards in Texas, etc.? Look, this moralizing is something that we can take. We don't have to give much attention to it. And I'm very happy Modi did not and basically let it pass. That is the way to handle these kinds of woke activities, because they have to be handled.
Right. And Adit, you live in Houston, you track politics very carefully in the United States as well as in India. And I was just curious to know from you, what is the response to Kamala Harris? Professor Dipankar is right. There have been a few channels over here, part of the same ideological family, who have picked up on her kind of reiterations, which everybody seems to make during these kind of visits, and try to play them up as a talking down or a schooling of sorts. What is your take?
I mean, first of all, I think it is important to notice that Joe Biden is the undisputed leader of the Democratic Party right now. So there is sort of a struggle within the Democratic Party also about which part, because Joe Biden is center to left of center. We may have disagreements with his positions, and I have disagreed with him, agreed with a few positions, and so forth. But he still represents a relative old school liberalism, which represented sort of a continuation in relations with India. That it didn't really matter who was in power in America, it didn't really matter who was in power in India. India-American relations in the last 20 years have just gone on stronger and so forth. Coming to Kamala Harris, I think she has an election to win in 2024. She wants to be a challenger, and so she wants to also appease this far left progressive lobby in the United States, and also the op-ed circuits and the think tank circuit, so to speak. And so some of the statements she's made was because you get the approval from there. But by and large, apart from that one statement and the 10-second clip that she may have put out on Twitter, her response to Prime Minister Modi was positive, and I think that ultimately she'll have to rein back, because on the ground there isn't much support of her taking this sort of weird hardline stance on India, because there is nothing. I mean, what are you going to oppose India on, right? Being a democracy like the United States, having uninterrupted positive diplomatic relations for the last how many ever years, and a strong trading partner. As a response to that, yes, Biden his disapproval rating has gone up, but it hasn't still reached sort of Trumpian levels yet. And there is sort of a weird churning going on within America as well, between the Democrats and the Republicans. But where I want to come back to this trip is that there is some sort of a coherence when it comes to the Foreign Affairs or the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations on how they should deal with India. And this week was a big week in that. What Prime Minister Modi and Joe Biden's bilateral meet showed us was, even though Prime Minister Modi and President Donald Trump shared a strong relations, and before that, everyone forgets how good the relations between Mr. Modi and Mr. Obama were.
Right, and Obama is a bit of a cold person as a person. He's a little reserved,
they wrote a column together. They wrote a column together. They did what we did also. I think they did a podcast together or something like that as well. So, and also you have to understand, they come from two different generations. So there was a significant age gap between Prime Minister Modi and President Obama as well. I think more than 15 or close to 20 years. So, so that being said, I'm not surprised that the camaraderie was shared by Joe Biden and Mr. Modi. Where we have to look at is Joe Biden's positions on Pakistan have been very different back in the past. He has been bullish on Pakistan, and when it comes to Afghanistan and a rising Taliban, we cannot just completely ignore the role that Pakistan has played there and the role US will play vis-a-vis Pakistan. So what Narendra Modi said at the United Nations General Assembly after meeting with Joe Biden is also very significant, where he said that we have to keep, essentially hinted that states that use terror as a state policy cannot use Afghanistan as a launching pad.
Very interesting. And Surya, you're sitting in Europe, in Switzerland, not part of the Quad, watching quietly as things get on. And, you've had Macron kind of go at it with the Americans. You have Merkel now exiting office after a very long time. So Germany, one of the strongest economies in Europe, is going to see a change of guard. What has been your perspective watching from afar?
When it comes specifically to what happened in New York and DC, I think that overall, when the Europeans look at what is happening, they see that the U.S. has clearly started finding its counter China strategy primarily through allying within the Anglosphere through AUKUS, right? And I think that in many ways, the only military power within Europe is France. So, especially after the UK has exited. So, as I see it, France will want to take a lead in Europe to kind of push the continent's Indo-Pacific strategy and shape Europe's vision for the Indo-Pacific over the next century. You have a demilitarized Germany to a large extent. So France is the one that will really take the lead in this regard. Now, I'd like to put it in context of what India would quite possibly like to find useful from the changing landscape. Firstly, the kind of breakaway of France and their need to look for another market for their defense equipment gives a fillip to our strategic autonomy. We do not need to, as Indians, look at just the U.S. or Russia as the potential partners. So for our submarine program that we plan to expand on the nuclear front, working closely with France is something that is likely to be on the cards. If you see Macron's statement that came out on Twitter, very warm and also quite pointed when he talked about ensuring their joint vision for the Indo-Pacific to actually end up being actualized through some sort of joint development of military products and strategies. So I think that's one aspect. The other aspect is when you look at the Quad, as I see it, and I think from the European standpoint, they will look at the Quad as a grouping that kind of will be more political rather than military. And I do think that there will be more work on trade and creating interdependencies between these four economies. Because I think that moves supply chains away from China to some extent, reduces China's leverage in the world. And as a result, it does contain China, right? So I think this is one of the strategies that will be in place. And coming from an energy and commodities background myself, I would definitely say that clean tech supply chains have to be managed outside the Chinese realm. Because right now, 80 to 90% of rare earths and a lot of metals, critical metals used in the supply of batteries is controlled by the CCP. So it becomes imperative to have energy independence in pretty much across the world, especially in democracies across the world. They cannot possibly be working knowing that the Chinese can basically curtail their supply at any point in time. So in that context, India, Japan, Australia, resource-rich Australia, will be working together with the US as we see a transformation to a greener and cleaner world.
Professor Dipankar, you were nodding along as Surya was speaking. What exactly resonated with you? I think part of it was this strategy to contain China. If you'd like to come in, please go ahead.
Two things. One was the centrality of France. France pushing Europe's global strategic vision, etc., and that is why what has happened, the sinking of the Australia-France submarine nuclear deal is something that I regret. You see, Australia somewhere down the line decided that conventional submarines, diesel submarines would not do it. They needed nuclear submarines. Fine, I understand that. But even France could have offered nuclear submarines to the Australians if the Australians had spoken about it. The Australians unfortunately handle this very badly by not telling France that there had been a change in their thinking. And what has happened is the following. So France is now excluded from this particular region, although it has interests out here. And what we see, and I see this with some trepidation, is the entry of the United Kingdom coming east of the Suez after so many decades. This is the first. And their capacity for mischief, in the United Nations Security Council debate that China had called over Jammu and Kashmir, when the world was overwhelmingly with India, even then they were basically prevaricating. So now they have no stakes in this particular region, but as part of global Britain, they have now been able to make an entry in a manner which is nefarious, the word perfidious Albion comes to mind. So they've made an entry. They have no stakes in this particular region. Even in the Conservative Party, Theresa May has made discordant noises that what are we doing out there? Okay, let's keep that aside. So France's presence out here, I think, would have worked out well for us. I think would have worked out well for security. The second part is supply chains. I couldn't agree more. But the problem out here is it needs two things. One is India, in a sense, has to reform faster. We are doing it. We need to reform faster. Look, a lot of companies are relocating from China, but they're relocating in Vietnam, they're relocating in Bangladesh. I mean, Vietnam as a supplier of electronics has just exploded over the last in the last decade. You know, Bangladesh also has done very, very well when it comes to garments. No, there are certain things India has to do. You know, we have to make our economy far more open, far more dynamic. Ease of doing business has to come down. And let us face it, the Modi government has been tackling this at all levels at breakneck speed. The second thing that needs to be done is the change of mentality of corporations who hitherto outsourced much of their value chains in China and prior to that in Southeast Asia. I understand there was a time for that when doing business in those areas was very easy and you couldn't do business in India at all. But this is not the time. And especially if you're into high technology items, India plays by the rules. We will obey your intellectual property rights. So it's not as if we manufacture something from us, we copy it, and then basically we start manufacturing it ourselves. The world knows this. So something substantial has to be done. And that is why Prime Minister Modi's US visit is so significant. You know, because he talked about the diversification of supply chains. He's met US tech majors. He's basically trying to say, look, this is not just a security problem in a sense of guns, missiles at one level. It's also to do with your diversity of supplies so that the person who monopolizes trade with us cannot hold it as a whip hand. Let me go back earlier. You know, in 2002, when we went for the nuclear tests, Japan was furious. We understand Japan. Australia was furious. You know, a lot of contrived moralizing. Our defense personnel were hauled out from the courses they were attending and sent back home. You know, and that time, and for a long time, Australia had this very nice, comfortable relation with China, where they converted themselves into primary producers for China. If you look at Australia's trade, 37% of their trade, those exports goes to China, iron ore and so on and so forth. They are basically the mine for China. And the going was good. It was China which was seen to be responsible player in the world affairs, and India was seen to be irresponsible. See how things change. See how things.
Professor, this is the last 20 years, right? It's been the last 20 years that this transformation has taken place.
Yes. 37% of your exports hooked to China, and now you are afraid. It's a little late in the day. Let us hope it is not too late in the day. And that is why what Prime Minister Modi has laid out, which Surya was speaking about, the diversification of supply chains, value chains, has to take place, and a responsible country like India, which plays by multilateral rules, has to be part of that value chain. We are building the infrastructure for it. We have the manpower for it, and we have the institutions for it.
Yes, and I think what you said about IP and intellectual property rights, I think that's significant because that is a very big concern with the Chinese. Rajiv ji, you were wanting to come in as a professor was speaking. I think it had to do with AUKUS. I think that was, or the submarine deal. Please go ahead.
About AUKUS, actually AUKUS is slightly misread and misunderstood in the world. Is it a contradiction to Quad? No, it is not. Is it it is going to supplement it? No, it is not. So again, coming to the deal, there is some dispute, and France got angry, and then France has started reacting. Then there was counter reaction by Australia also last Sunday. Australia told that the withdrawal is nothing new and not abrupt. In fact, France was conveyed about Australian concerns long back. And that $66 billion deal with France for 12 submarines was not found very suitable for strategic interest of Australia because of several reasons. They say that attack class submarines, which France was supposed to supply to Australia did not or does not meet its range in the meet its requirement in terms of range, because it needed longer range. Plus, they also needed something greater speed, because China is what China is doing. China is very at a very greater speed, very fast speed, manufacturing frigates. They are not. They are say, giving very mixed signal on aircraft carrier, but certainly submarines. It has got more submarine than even United States, at least number wise. Quality wise, we can discuss. Quality wise, it may not deliver. So what AUKUS is going to do, as many are talking about, it is going to provide a military arm to Quad. Plus, generally we were talking about Quad Plus. Are these four countries enough, or we have to expand it? For last 1 year, I attended at least 3 to 4 meetings on how to expand Quad. So not only I attended, there are many meetings where which I did not attend. People were discussing, people are still discussing how to expand Quad. Just should we just remain with these four countries, or this should become Quad Plus or new names, because the moment it is Quad Plus, it will not be Quad. So they are discussing, and basically what is going to happen, they all are pulling their resources. And this is the new phenomenon, new paradigm emerging in international relations. Like, well, not only 3 or 4 countries, because China is not only a concern for these 4 countries. China is a big concern for those who are not in all these groupings, for Philippines, for Vietnam, for Singapore, for Indonesia, for Malaysia. China is a concern for all of them. Even France earlier expressed its concern and wanted to join the other countries which are really concerned with China. So I think that is this AUKUS should be seen from that perspective, that world is coming together, and in different forms. Something three countries groupings, 4 countries groupings, 5 countries groupings on issue areas, on interest-based groupings which are coming up. Issue areas, suppose there could be a grouping completely based on how to pull our resources to augment or do research and development on emerging technologies, different emerging technologies. So there could be a grouping on that, and that grouping may be called something different. But that doesn't mean that it is going to undermine other groupings. Similarly, just now we talked about supply chain initiative. Someone talked about that. The supply chain initiative, already Australia, Japan, and India, all three had entered into global supply chain initiative. And global supply chain is one of the important factor, one of the important issues, which is dogging all the countries. I mean, Prime Minister spoke about it in the United Nations General Assembly. And once you are going to somehow shift the focus away from China, there should be an alternative supply chain initiative. And in fact, the Biden administration is also doing what Trump administration had already done. And it talked to different countries, it talked to different companies located in these companies. The last, you can say the earlier benefits were taken by Japan, by European countries, to an extent by Vietnam. But now, even United States wants to diversify the base. And when it wants to diversify the base, it talked to India, it talked to South Korea, it talked to Australia, and it is talking to many other countries, which could also partner with all these countries. And the moment you are going to check, or you are going to put some check on for China, so your company should not complain that, look, you are going to destroy us, so provide us the alternative. So this is how the world is moving. United States is moving, other countries are also moving. So this is very diversified, complex phenomenon which is emerging. And like it or not, in last, say 30 years, you can say, some may say last 50 years, China somehow slowly started moving away from the socialist Soviet bloc. First it got integrated with the Western bloc, and then with the whole of the world. The whole of the world became dependent for so many requirements on China. So now once you are going to snap that link, so you'll have to have a very, very strong alternative. So this is how we should see all these developments, whether happening in during the Prime Minister Modi's visit or before that, August, in this light. This is
Okay.
all efforts being made. Okay.
I think Adit also wanted to come in and had a question or a comment to make while you were speaking. I think this is, Adit, an interesting time for India as well. Never
Absolutely.
before have we been in the middle of such a churn. You know, usually we're sitting on the sidelines and watching. I think, at least in my memory, this is sort of significant because for the first time we're in the mix.
Yeah,
But go ahead, you had some comments to make.
we are participating and watching, so to speak. But I think there are three big things that were at the focus when the visit happened this time. First of all, we have to we have to acknowledge that this is not only the first visit post pandemic, this is the first visit in a post Trump US as well. So what sort of re-engagement was going to happen, but we saw that there was an extension essentially of the policies. And there were three big things: an economic impact, strategic impact, and cultural impact. And I'll come to the cultural impact at the last. Economic ones, you have to, US is so dependent economically on China that if you have to counter China, not only has it to be a strategic strategy, we also have to do on the economic and supply chains, as Surya and Professor Sengupta and Rajiv ji after have mentioned. So that's the first thing, right? Because we are talking the week when new iPhones were released, and you just have to go and talk to America and how dependent they are on China, on everyone having a new iPhone in their hand, right? So it can be as complicated as the Quad and as simple as holding an iPhone in the hand if you want to really gauge the Chinese impact on American sort of minds right now. Second is the strategic impact. Where absolutely Australia had become so dependent on China that India and Japan were almost acting as a counterweight to Australia and convincing Australia to move away from China. We forget the investment that Adani made in the uranium mining a few years ago, I think, Australia. That's why it was so significant. A few media houses in India went a little ballistic, but they forgot the biggest picture, that why this was so and why China is also taking a sudden interest in Afghanistan and Taliban is, I don't think they care about Pakistan. They just want to use Pakistan as an irritant to India, and neither do they care about what is happening in Afghanistan. They are interested in the rare earth minerals that are still left unmined there. And if there is one thing the Chinese are good at, is supply and mine, and they just will keep doing that, right? And another thing that people don't focus on is what is happening in Hong Kong. In the last 1 or 2 months, China has cracked down severely on corporations in Hong Kong that are seen to be either listed in America or close to, the Western sort of point of view. And it has resulted in the devaluation of those corporations. Their stock prices have gone down, their value has gone down, and the corporations are doing fine. It's just they're afraid of CCP imposing more sanctions. They're doing the same thing in Macau. So they are essentially going after all the small things that were associate or closer to the West. So how that pans out has to be seen. And my last point about the cultural was, let's not forget, half or more than half of Prime Minister's speech in the United Nations was on vaccines and the role that India played in that. So India has to play a significant role in that as well, and make sure we use the vaccine diplomacy, especially in places like Africa, which have been definitely affected by China and are also in need of vaccines. So how India leverages that, we'll have to see in the time to come.
We have a viewer comment that from Sanjeev, who's saying, Adit, I remember reading somewhere that India's contribution to iPhone 13 global sales has shot up to 70% vis-a-vis China's 30%.
Even if that may be true in terms of the number of devices sold, I don't know how the production has gone down. These American companies have also come up with a very fun sort of thing, because now they were mad. People were getting mad that everything was produced in China. They write on their laptops and phones that it is assembled in US, and then all the small parts are made in China and then shipped over to US. So I hope Sanjeev is right, but I'm not quite sure if the number is that drastic. I'd be happy to be corrected, but I think it's it's significantly more in China, right? Even now.
Surya, what is the European take on China? I know, like some of the European countries that were part of the Soviet bloc, so to speak, are kind of leaning China's way, and China is making investments and sort of paying their way into friendship with them. But what's happening in Europe when it comes to China?
Well, if you look at it, there was the investment deal that was on the cards at one point in time. If you look at some of the finer print of that investment deal, it was kind of allowing companies to operate without necessarily having joint ventures with Chinese companies in China. It gave some sort of mechanism for redressal of problems if there were any sort of legal issues. So it was going to be more of a government to government sort of dealing on these sort of things. And then there was a ratification, or at least movement towards ratification of certain elements of the ILO, for labor rights by the Chinese. Now, to me, this seems like something that should have been done probably back in 2001 when China was admitted into the WTO. But clearly it was not done, and China kind of keeps shifting the goalpost a little bit and allowing themselves a little bit more wiggle room to keep dumping goods below the marginal cost of production into overseas markets, which actually works quite well for corporations across Europe and in the United States. I want to just step back a little bit and look at it from a broader economic standpoint. If you look at it from 1990, from the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall through till probably till now, you could say, there's been a period of rapid globalization and the need for labor arbitrage. So, and it got accentuated after 2008, when actually before 2008 and early 2000s, when quantitative easing started becoming a part of the Federal Reserve policy. So they keep interest rates low, they print more money, and essentially that money, where does it go? It goes back into the stock market, as we have seen right now. Right, one of the reasons why equity valuations have gone through the roof for a lot of companies is because it goes into the to the investors who decide that where are we going to put our money, into companies which can be loss making in the short term, but they need to have a monopolistic sort of position in the market. Now, this is the American way and the European way of countering China's subsidy-driven sort of market distorting mechanism that they keep running, where they can keep producing goods or selling goods below marginal cost to gain market share. Now, one of the spin-offs of the sort of quantitative easing program and the low interest rate program is you end up having higher inflation, and we're seeing that kicking in right now. Now, in order to control inflation, what do you have to do? You have to keep importing goods which are cheap. So the dependency on China actually increases. So in one way, the corporates of Europe and the West and the US have gained more power, but at the same time, these countries are more dependent on cheap goods from China to keep inflation low. So I do go back to the point about shifting supply chains, because that's one way of being able to extricate yourself from being dependent on China, and you can keep running your low interest rate policy, at least up to a point. That I think is generally the central view in all developed economies. Whether it's the Europeans are also looking at it because they're going through a period of potentially very high inflation over the next couple of quarters, with high energy prices, and that's something that we can even discuss at a later point in time more in detail. But inflation is really picking up here, so they need to control it. Now, are they going to go back and have a deal with the Chinese? Because they stepped back from it recently. They stepped back from the CAI. I'm not sure. I don't think they are. But to do a 180 on that, I think it's going to be very difficult in the short term. But they need to have an alternative. Are they going to go and invest in countries like Vietnam, Bangladesh, which actually are running Chinese companies or Chinese production units out there? They're not Vietnamese or Bangladeshi. Many of them are not locals. They're local companies, that they're Chinese companies that are operating there. So are they going to go down that route and still be beholden to China? I don't know. So the real teeth of the Quad or any sort of bilateral relationship between India and countries within Europe comes from whether we can actually sell India as a place where you can move your production base to, because we as a country are not going to threaten the global order. We're not going to destabilize the global order. That's why I genuinely believe that India will be central to any sort of strategy to counter Chinese expansionism and their subversion of global free markets. I'd like to make one more quick point on the defense side of things, because this is something that the DTTI has been running for a while now, but I think it has not really produced the dividends that India had really, and the US had actually hoped for. But in the joint statement that came out yesterday, I think it was quite notable that they talked about unmanned aerial vehicles as being an area of joint development. I think I think the US in many ways has realized they cannot crack the Indian fighter jet market. That's something that they have not been able to do. And I don't think that with the S-400 purchases, I think that's ever going to work. So they're working in parallel to this to try and find another area where they can work together in new technologies. Now, with UAVs comes a lot of other technologies in terms of communication networks that will keep accelerating over time. Now, AI, quantum computing, and unmanned, not just aerial vehicles, naval vehicles as well, will be the focus of a lot of new technological developments between the US, India, and other countries that are looking to contain China. This is going to be, as I see, another arms race. We saw an arms race during the during Cold War. And we have to remember one thing. The US has always benefited from an arms race. During, whether it's World War II, pre-World War II, post-World War II, during the Cold War, they developed their most critical technologies during an arms race. And those technologies have civilian spin-offs. Even the very fact that we can communicate today through the internet comes from originally a military technology. Now, what I see is that India never participated in an arms race to the same extent. I mean, nuclear is a separate thing, but a sort of technological arms race over the last 100 years. This is the first time India will actually be participating in it. And that, I think, will have the potential for us to elevate our technological capabilities to the level of a superpower over the next 20 to 30 years. This is not like the Cold War lasted for 30 years, right? If not longer, right? So this is something that we will see a major structural shift. Now, there was one last point that I wanted to make, is that because the US needs to reinvent itself, it feels the need to, in order to maintain its dominance in the world, it has to keep updating this technology. And this is exactly where the Biden administration's Cold War veteran stacked cabinet is going to play an important role in defining sort of military policies. They might have stepped back from Afghanistan, but they're not stepping back from militarizing. That is probably the key.
Right. And you lead us to a very important question, and I'd like to place this same question to the entire panel. COVID, the present condition we're in, these new configurations that are taking place amongst nations, the flare-ups amongst countries who usually get along, there's a churn in place. There's a reset that's going on. How do you, starting with you, Professor, what do you think the new world order is going to be?
Look, there's no doubt that COVID, in a sense, was a black swan event. But to think, the 10 years down the line, we will still think about COVID, etc., I think is a bit much. But there are certain things that have come to light. For example, Covishield administered in India is not seen to be same to be the Covishield administered in the United Kingdom. When this is brought to the notice of the United Kingdom authorities, what do they say? Look, it's basically the public authority that we are talking about. Our way of certifying that a particular person has received 2 jabs, I think, is far more secure than the United Kingdom's. So for the United Kingdom to say this is, again, perfidious. The other thing is Covaxin. I have a feeling that when it comes to vaccines made in India, and this has been true for a long period of time, medicines made in the rest of the world, unless it receives FDA approval will always be second-class citizens, and their recipients will always face barriers when they go to other countries. So, I believe, you see, given the fact that we've ramped up our capacities, we will inoculate ourselves pretty soon. We will also ensure that the rest of the world inoculates itself in the next 2 years or so. Inoculation per se isn't the problem. Our responses to COVID will not be a problem, but this apartheid we have, the medicine apartheid that we have, will remain a problem, will remain a serious problem. And somewhere down the line, I think we also have to address this. So FDA approval may be necessary for the United States, but the African nations, in a sense, have to come together and say, look, is this working for us? Because what it does is to create a monopoly for certain pharma majors, and it is their medicines for even very commonplace diseases that rules the roost and contribute to making the prices of medicine in very poor countries the highest in the world. So this nonsense has to end, and I think India has to take a lead in this particular
That's
regard.
what I didn't understand, because a lot of people were saying this is racism and the British are big racist, and all I said was pharma wars. I saw I said that here we are. We can make these vaccines.
Advaita, it has
They
nothing
don't
to do
want us
with
to make the vaccines. They don't want us to sell those vaccines.
Advaita, it has nothing to do with race. As
Even I thought so. Yeah.
As Napoleon Bonaparte said, it's a nation of shopkeepers. It is everything to do with money. So
Exactly.
these things that are basically built in ensures, it's a non-trading, it's a non-tariff barrier, it's a non-economic barrier, but it ensures that certain majors, pharma majors established in the West, their medicines, no matter what their efficacy is vis-a-vis the other medicines, is privileged over the rest. And unfortunately, we have not done enough in this particular regard. In fact, it is only now that we are mapping our traditional medicines. We are basically looking at Indian pharmacology to see what they can do and what they cannot do. A little late in the day, nonetheless, we are doing it. So let us not be confused. Let us not confuse it with racism. It is economic. You see,
Right.
Acha, it basically brings me to one point that Surya mentioned. This application of technology. If you look at the backbone which basically supports our certification of COVID, it is this backbone that allowed the government of India to transfer money during COVID within hours. The United States is still writing checks. So there is no doubt that when it comes to application of certain technologies, because of political will that we exhibited, that Modi showed very early on, we happen to be ahead of the United States. The US has this capability, but if Joe Biden or Trump had tried to do something like this, I can see the number of suits and countersuits that would have been filed in the United States. The US government would have gone very bankrupt, trying to fight that. So there is a political problem, a political lethargy, inertia, what we would call it, when it comes to measures to ascertain identity. Ours is much less so. It exists. It's much less so. It has enabled us to leapfrog so many things. Hopefully, we will be able to leapfrog to many other levels, especially where IT is concerned. Because in a sense, IT is easiest to implement, and IT-related things, knowledge management systems, in a sense, not being capital intensive, are easier to implement than others. But I have to come back to a couple of points. One that Surya mentioned. When China was admitted to the WTO, I must confess, I was relieved because it meant that they would abide by rules. Okay, they would export to the rest of the world, that would increase, but we would also get to export to China, where we had a comparative advantage. And so the West thought that they would basically export their technology-intensive items into China. But as China has basically not played in good faith, they have shifted the goalposts, as Surya said. They have violated every IPR rule, and suddenly you have Chinese products which are basically remakes of American or Western products, where the technology is basically copied from these particular persons. Under those circumstances, the entry that China made into WTO was a strategic part of China's entry to gain market access, not to play by rules. Number one. Number two, let me come back briefly to the point that Rajiv mentioned. He talked about Quad being Quad plus with the entry of AUKUS. I have no problems with the Australians realizing that conventional submarines would not do, that as force multipliers, nuclear submarines were better. I completely agree with this. My problem is the following. They should have brought it to the notice of the French that it is nuclear submarines that we want. Now, the French have said the problem with the French nuclear submarines is that their machines, the nuclear part, the reactor has to be replaced every 10 years or so. Let us face this. Australia is not going to get its first nuclear submarine before quite some time. The United States has no spare nuclear submarines to lease to the United States. They could have at least started leasing nuclear submarines from France. So this entry that has been made is not Quad Plus. It is Quad Plus and Quad Minus. Plus is Britain, whose entry I suspect. Minus is France, I think would have made for a large, far more dependent ally. Secondly, Australia's other problem. We started off with Quad. So you have Kevin Rudd coming in, practically taking Australia out of the Quad. And, so if this kind of behavior where a country leaves the Quad, comes back again, makes it very difficult for the others to join you. Because, joining you has consequences. Joining you means riling China. So if you are not sure about your goals, if there is no organizational coherence, you are not likely to get people to join you. Now, there are certain people who are, who've been talking to us. Vietnam has been talking to us. And I think if that materializes, it will be great. But the fact is, we have to be very, very careful as to how to expand this. Who comes in? Who is forced to leave because of the shenanigans of certain persons? That, I think, is extremely important. I think the entry of nuclear submarines by Australia, in a sense, is a good thing. It gives teeth to the Quad. But I would have preferred it to have been French nuclear submarines rather than American nuclear submarines coming via United Kingdom. Because the presence of United Kingdom is a disturbing factor. It's been a disturbing factor in the European Union. It is likely to be a disturbing factor in the Indo-Pacific. And in an area where you have no stakes, why are you coming in? That is my problem. No other problem. The Quad is not damaged by AUKUS, but I would have thought it would have been strengthened with the continued presence of France. If not as a full member, but as a useful ally of both India and Australia. That's all I have to say.
Surya, you were sitting in neutral Switzerland, but were nodding away when Professor Sengupta said Britain is the problem. So do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Well, the thing is, if we go back, for example, to, let's say, the invasion of Iraq, and we see how Tony Blair just did what he was expected to do by the United States. He pretty much just followed the orders from DC in a sense. Knowing full well that the war was not going to be based on any sort of legitimate concerns over weapons of mass destruction, because we know that turned out to be false. They were fully aware of the falsehoods of those of the intelligence that they used for entering Iraq. But from there till now, the UK has not really changed in many ways, right? They have realized their position in the world in a way since the end of their colonial era, that they have had to become a state which works very closely with the United States, is embedded as one of the central figures in the Anglosphere, which operates as a financial conduit for transactions from around the world. And it basically arbitrages through its position as a financial capital, one of the major financial capitals. Its exit from the European Union was a part of a realignment towards strengthening towards the Anglosphere, to strengthen the Anglosphere as probably one of the major bulwarks against any sort of movement in any sort of strengthening in the Asia Pacific, you could say. To what extent it can be successful is it's going to be there's a lot to see, but I do think that they will try to express themselves in terms of their interests internationally through their presence in AUKUS, right? Because otherwise they have literally no presence in the Indo-Pacific. They have no reason to be present. So the point is that they might try and play to their domestic gallery a few times by expressing themselves to AUKUS. Now that is a point of concern if you ever see the Labour coming back into power. I still think that's a very marginal issue because I think overall strategic issues matter more than some small electoral groups domestically, but it's something that we should be mindful of. But when we look at it from the point of view of how this grouping, the grouping of three is going to is a reflection of the past. We go back into, for example, the world wars pre-NATO actually. The Anglosphere has always been tight, and they will look out for each other. So India is not a part of it. There are many in India who think that we will be part of this broader alliance of countries. We're not. We have a strategic autonomy that we should value. And that value is coming to the fore now. When we can choose our partners, we can work with Russia, we can work with France if we choose to. And we can develop our own defense capabilities. Ultimately, that is the goal, right? You want to become like Russia in the sense that in terms of having good, very strong defensive capabilities and offensive capabilities manufactured in your own country, it gives you the chance to do what you want. And you can exercise a lot more power in any grouping. And in fact, you will have more power in whether it's the Quad. If you want to militarize the Quad, you can choose to do a lot more. If you have your own native, your indigenous defense equipment manufacturing. Now, until then, transfer of technology, joint ventures, all these sort of things they're very important. But the path should be to try and get there. Now, as the global order is changing, that was the question that you had at the beginning. How do you see the global order changing? I think Europe, in terms of demographics, in terms of in terms of technology and how it's trying to leverage technology to get ahead of their aging demographics and to still remain relevant in the world, they have a lot. They need to earn money for that to be able to develop those technologies. For that, they need a market to sell their technologies in. So they need to sell that either in China, they need to sell it in India, they need to sell it in other countries, right? Or they need to sell it to the United States. And ultimately, the United States is still the superpower of the world. We have to we talk a lot about their decline, and yes, there are many issues that they're having today, but they're trying to reinvent themselves. And Dr. Jaishankar actually talked about that. He talked about the US reinventing itself. Now, how they reinvent themselves on the social side of things is another issue, right? Through their sort of realignment of their intellectual discourse, or lack of, if you may, in the US. But I think when it comes to the military side, they're very used to reinventing themselves and realigning their groupings with other countries, finding markets to sell their technology, propping up other countries where they think those countries could be useful to them. India is it's a bit of a tough nut to crack, because with Japan, they could sell their F-35s, they could sell their different types of platforms, because they know that the Japanese are willing to give a certain degree of agency to the US over their military, parts of their military. But India is not going to be willing to do that, right? So that's why it takes a long time to get stuff done. Even the DTTI, if you see, it was not actually, the potential of that was not actualized for a very long period of time, still not. Let's hope it does. But it's because India is still resistant to sharing a lot, right? Or allowing the US to kind of capture parts of our systems, right? We're not going to let that happen. So we have to work together to try and develop something new. That's where investment in local R&D is important. So you're an equal partner in transfer technology. You're an equal partner in joint ventures. You're pulling weight equally. That's where we need to kind of focus on.
Okay.
There's a comment here about just one last point on this. There's a comment on the Andaman and Nicobar Command, right? I think that this is a very interesting thing, because we have a strategic location where we can project power in the Indian Ocean region. It's not just about projecting power, it's about securing all these countries, the Philippines, Indonesia, Taiwan probably less so because they're on the other side, but the Indian Ocean region should be an area where India says that we take responsibility for the security of, right? And how do we achieve that goal, right? We work with the other countries, but we also work with the Southeast Asian countries to get there, right? We need to have close, different sorts of military exercises, naval exercises. But that's a very important point, and I think that the developing the Andaman and Nicobar Islands will be an important part of that. So
yeah, I agree with you absolutely. I think we have to kind of get off the bench a little bit, which is what we've been doing for many years. And I want to just go very quickly to Adit and Rajiv ji as well. Adit, Surya brought up the intellectual discourse in the US. And I remember this hilarious cartoon that was out there, which said, look at the Taliban, they're so inclusive, and they're sitting at the UN and they have their nameplate, and then there's a he/him kind of marker.
There are actually, so on a lighter note, there are actually two Americas. One is talking about this Quad and strategic affairs. The second is debating with itself on school boards, on whether they should have two national anthems, on whether they should wear masks in public. I mean, it is unbelievable. And I mean, nothing is more evident than I was watching Bill Maher's show yesterday. Bill Maher is still an old school liberal, where half the show was talking about what is happening on a global level, like on economic issues, and then his editorial was whether him responding to Whoopi Goldberg on whether two national anthems should be there or not, right? And it was unbelievable. But one thing what Professor Sengupta said, and this is in America, this is what's being sold on a lot of things, that France wanted to sell diesel submarines and America wanted to sell nuclear submarines. So, and I'm not kidding, it is as dumbed down as the French submarines would make noise in water and the American submarines would not. And I mean, this is being sold in many quarters in America. So this is how they're trying to project that the US selling of submarines to Australia was a common sense decision or an economic decision and so forth. And he also brought up a point about China and WTO. And my friend Sunanda has always said one thing: what is the West going to regret? One is admitting China to WTO or admitting Turkey to NATO, right? And that is something we have to chew on. because right now both are essential tinder boxes, right? And we always sort of discuss on how this is going to take forward. If I were to be absolutely brutally honest, the US political domestic discourse is completely isolated from the rest of the world. Unfortunately, foreign policy and discussion and where the US plays, what role US plays in the world is being reduced to like a one-line punchline. So every American president will start with this this thing: US is going to be the leader of the free world, but they are never defining what the free world is going to be. Right after 2001, 20 years later, we're still having a resurgent Taliban. We're still seeing US at the brink of war with itself. And the point about UK being not where it should be, वो तो पुरानी आदत है. I think that is UK being true to itself, being where it's not supposed to be or where it has no stake, and trying to see if it can do any impacts or not. So that is the crux of it. But going forward, and this is one last point, going forward in American presidential elections also, I see foreign policy being less and less of an issue, and Joe Biden in a strange sort of way is almost more Trumpian than Trump. This is a phrase said by Bill Maher, I think Shekhar Gupta, many others have said it, because he's almost being bullish on this America First policy without really taking advice from advisors that this is actually going to harm America in the long run. And in a post-Brexit Europe, they have to engage with France a lot more than Britain. Britain has been this vassal state of America, to use this old medieval terminology, and Pakistan has been their military outpost. They have to re-engage both. They have to re-evaluate their strategy vis-a-vis Pakistan, and Britain cannot be this uninterruptible ally. The times of Tony Blair and the times of David Cameron are gone. now the times of Boris and post-Trump US are here, so they'll have to sort of renege their relationship with Britain as well.
Adit, Trump is off Twitter, so we don't hear that often from him, and I think he's blacked out by a lot of media also. Has he said anything recently, just out of curiosity and nostalgia?
He has, he has given statements. He completely condemned Joe Biden's thing on Afghanistan. He keeps giving statements and stuff, forgetting that he was the one who started signing the peace deals with the crazy peace deal that with the Taliban in the first place. But here is the problem with Trump, right? Trump may have gone off Twitter, but Trump has not gone off from the Republican Party. Many people were hoping that the Republican Party would go back to the center of right discourse and because Joe Biden's presidency has been a very mixed bag. I don't think right now he's lost a lot of ground he made 6 months ago. And honestly, the time is right if Republicans could come up with a sane centrist leader to take back the votes they lost in a few states. But the problem is the Republican Party is divided between the old school establishment, which is very bullish on Israel, India, and so forth, and the other half, which talks about how wearing mask is going to be some sort of a global catastrophe or so forth. So. But Advaita, I just remembered this was you talked about the far left progressive Democrats. This was a big blow for that. AOC was crying in the US House of Representatives because she was hoping that US would take this brave stance against Israel. And I want to tell your viewers that out of more than 429 votes, I think 429 people voted, they got a grand total of 9 people to vote against Israel. 400 people voted, more than 400 people voted for Israel. So and AOC, who voted present because she wants to fight a Senate seat in New York, burst out into tears. So नौटंकी यहाँ भी उतनी ही होती है जितनी इंडिया में होती है when it comes to politicians.
Right. And Rajiv ji, last comments to you before we wind up.
Yeah, thank you. I think 2 major points were raised in this segment, I should say. Starting with Dipankar's point, and I agree with Dipankar, not because he also had agreed with me. I agree with him that France factor should have been France issue should have been managed better for the benefit of or for the good of Quad and whatever is happening in this part of the world in Indo-Pacific region. Somehow it was not managed well, and why? Because there are so many factors, there are so many issues which are cropping up now and which are being debated all over the world. First, United States never allowed anyone to supply nuclear. This is not nuclear weapon submarine, but basically this is nuclear propelled submarine. Means in nuclear reactor, naval nuclear reactor will be used for running the submarine, running whatever submarine comes to Australia. So this is one basic factor. And in fact, United States had put pressure in the past on France and United Kingdom all to supply even a nuclear submarine to Canada. So they is saying that you are now allowing UK, and you are yourself. I don't know what US is going to, the role US is going to play, but I think that US is also going to have some commercial benefit out of it. So, and that is the issue. So that was the point of contention, that you are not allowing others. So I mean, France has the capacity to supply nuclear propelled. I mean, it says that I could have supplied low enriched uranium propelled, because this is another issue which is being raised by our section. I will not say all the non-proliferationists, our section of the non-proliferation community, and Frank von Hippel from Princeton University and others, some of likes of Frank von Hippel have been raising this issue, that more than 60% of the submarines which are operating in the world use highly enriched uranium, and they feel, although I don't consider, but they feel that it has, all these submarines have got proliferation potential, because highly enriched uranium, which could be leveled up or enriched up to the weapon grade. Once you have got highly enriched uranium, so this is what they say: please cut down and reduce it to the lower, and so make some transformation, some design modification, and have it for low enriched uranium. So France, in fact, I don't know, it is now it is coming up in the media that they had offered low enriched uranium based submarine also, which was not allowed because of US resistance in the past. So that's why they are getting angry. What is this? This is not fair. This is what, and I personally feel that yeah, we should, as Dipankar has rightly pointed out, somehow we have to take European also along. We should not antagonize them also. They have got also resources, potential. They can also contribute to it. And second thing, uh, when UK did Brexit, generally it thought that the EU will collapse, but somehow a strong pillar was provided by Germany, whose economy is really doing very good. I mean, say it is exceptionally well. It's doing. So they in fact became the leader. Nowadays, France is not the leader of the European bloc. It is Germany which has emerged as the leader of the European bloc, and this is United Kingdom unnecessarily, with wrong calculation, passed on the leadership of European countries, European EU, forget EU, European bloc to Germany. Now Germany is the leader. So that is also a point of contention, and France is trying to use the EU platform, the EU identity, the EU membership to somehow corner these two countries. So this is going on. So this was on AUKUS. We can at least you can have another show on that. So I
I
can
think
come and talk to that. But now coming to your original point, that was world order. I hope we have got time. Otherwise, I will stop here.
just a quick answer. We are actually
Okay.
over time.
World
So,
order and world order. I'll just because actually that was your original question, and this segment was basically
right.
to discuss world order. We went here and there. So world order, when this Corona problem, crisis, disease, whatever, pandemic, epidemic, all started, and when welfare measures, corrective measures are started, many announced, and then there was an article in Financial Times that this is the end of the era of interdependence. All the countries have to do or act nationally. So now this is international element is gone. So new world order will be more nationalistic in orientation and
Right.
because that time it was, as we all discussed, it was Trumpian era, and he had no faith in WHO. He was just trashing everything. But what has emerged, that don't draw any conclusion hasty. Later on, we realized that the significance of interdependence is still relevant. See, interdependence helps once you are in crisis, like when we had crisis, somehow because of mismanagement of oxygen or many other issues. Then the help, assistance poured in from the world. Similarly, we also at that time we also stopped uh, something called vaccine matters. Say, look, Indians are to be vaccinated first, and then we will talk about Paramo Dharma, Seva Paramo Dharma. So that we also, our national interest is paramount, and that was a good decision. And so then again we came back to okay, interdependence, global good, global values, mankind's development, everything, all are valid, but all values are to interpreted according to your needs, according to the time, and according to the situation. And this is how
Sure.
even world order is
Hmm.
taking shape.
Hmm.
It was very dynamic, very out, and it was shaped by very fast moving
Hmm.
factors, forces of the world in last 2 years. So the nation states are still relevant. Interdependence is still relevant. International organization is still relevant. International values, global values are still relevant. So all are still relevant, but a nation can contribute more and more in a more constructive way without destroying like China is doing. And this is the message given by the post-COVID, or you can say the COVID management of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rajiv ji. And yes, in fact, COVID has humbled, I think, all nations. Presently in the US,
Exactly.
also the headlines of full ICUs, oxygen running out, and it feels like India. Frankly, when you see these headlines in other parts of the world. I want to thank all of you really for joining us. I'd like to tell our viewers to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification button. I'm going to be back on Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. with a very interesting guest. As you all are aware, Prime Minister Modi is bringing back some of our idols from the United States, and that's momentous and something that I really want to talk about because it's a first, and I think it's something that the person that I'm bringing on the show has been talking about and fighting for a very long time. And in fact, the cover of his book has one of the idols that the Prime Minister is bringing back with him. So join me at 7:30 p.m. on Tuesday to talk about that. And of course, we'll be back next Sunday. And those of you who are asking about Suhail and Abhijit, Abhijit was unwell. He's doing much better now, but he's taking a bit of a break, and I think he needs to take that break. As for Suhail, there was a bereavement in his family 2 weeks ago. He unfortunately lost his mother, and after that he had to take a trip abroad. So the two of them will be back, but more importantly, I really want to thank you all for tuning in and watching. Our numbers are great today, and I want to thank my panel for that as well. And we'll keep getting fresh perspectives, fresh voices, and of course have all of you back again soon when the time is right. Just a quick question, Adit and Surya, you both are vaccinated. Did you get a chit? Your vaccination certificate is a piece of paper?
No, mine is actually it's on an app. So the Europeans are a little bit more advanced. Except Britain. Britain, of course, since they left the EU, they're right now busy writing it on scraps of paper.
And you, Adit?
Yeah, mine is absolutely on a piece of paper. I wanted to say that I'm glad they wrote it with a pen. I thought they would put out a feather quilt and probably use anything. Because if you're going back in time, why not go all the way back in time? Why use a pen also?
That's so true. And oh, lovely. Anil Pandey said enlightening 2 hours. It was only 1 hour, but I'm sorry if it felt like two. But yes, I'm glad it was enlightening.
The funny thing here was you assumed that we would be vaccinated. This is the thing. In India, we are generally quite pro-vaccine. In many parts of Europe and the United States, the assumption is not that you will be vaccinated. It's quite it's an interesting
thing. It is offensive to ask that question. They'll ask you that, are you vaccinated? America is first asking itself whether it believes in vaccines or not.
No, I mean, my best friend in America, he's American. He's not vaccinated as yet. He refuses to get vaccinated. And I spend a fair amount of time telling him to get vaccinated. So I know what's going on. I mean, it's crazy. But we've learned really the hard way here. We had a terrible April and May. And looks like we're going to be on the other side of it. That's what it looks like right now. COVID, apart from Kerala, is mostly under control in India. Kerala is posting some crazy numbers. And full support to them at this time. But thank you everybody so much for watching, and we will be we never discussed UP and the new cabinet formation. I'm sorry, I said that we would talk about that. 7 new ministers have been sworn in. If anyone has anything interesting to say about that, I know Ajit Prasad, who is from the Congress, has got a berth. I don't know what his portfolio is. Adit, yeah.
So, I mean, cabinet rejigs this close to election are usually keeping elections in mind, because it's now you can count, it's what, 6 months to go. They have 7 ministers. I was looking at names, I think.
One woman, Sangeeta Balwant, was the yeah.
There is, I think, Mr. Paltu Ram, and then there is like 2 or 3 other names. Yeah. So now here is the interesting thing, right? 7 was the maximum that Yogi could add. So I think this was also to ensure that all camps within his government, in his establishment, are very satisfied that acha hame thoda kuch mil gaya. This is also a very clear indication that Jitin Prasada is not going to go to the center. If he is, he's probably going to get an MLA seat to fight in UP next year, and he's probably going to be made a cabinet minister in UP. So I think that is a sort of an indicator. The second thing is, I honestly don't think that too many of the previous ministers' portfolios are going to be rejigged. But you might see similar thing to what has happened in Gujarat previously. A lot of sitting MLAs, if not probably 30-40%, maybe even 10-20% of them might be dropped in this list. So that was one way that Chief Minister Narendra Modi would always beat anti-incumbency, and many of them or some of them could be ministers from the first cabinet as well. So we'll have to see how
Okay.
that happens.
Okay, interesting. And you mentioned Gujarat. So Mewani and Kanhaiya Kumar are moving to the Congress sometime this month, I think, very soon. So I think the Congress's
They are
march to the
moving
far
officially
left,
to the Congress.
officially to the Congress. So I think
They-
the Congress's march to the far left is pretty much
No, there is
big
a
now.
very famous Hindi proverb, na lौट के बुद्धू घर को आए. So, here is the thing that in Congress in Gujarat, and now you've triggered me, right, Advaita? Thank you for doing that.
Other guest Surya, if you find this boring, you can leave. It's been a while, so
No.
but
So this is
we're
because
political house. Yeah.
what else to do rather than trigger the non-resident Gujarati or the Gujarati in America on the panel to talk about Gujarat. But here is the thing with Mewani and others, right? Jignesh Mewani, if you go to the reason why he came to Congress, I actually highlighted that 3 weeks ago when Bhupendra Patel was made the CM, or 2 weeks ago. If you go to his constituency of Vadgam, the Congress workers were very angry because the only reason he won was because Congress did not put up a candidate and gave him a walkover. Right now, they were angry that a relatively safe Congress seat last year was given to Jignesh Mewani, who was essentially CPI and more CPI and less Congress. If you go to his timeline, he doesn't even tweet in Gujarati. He's only tweeting in Hindi because he wants to appeal to his friends in Delhi, right? So now this was like he was risking losing his seat. So this is a last ditch effort, and I had sources within the Gujarat political system which had told that Mewani is probably not going to be given a walkover this time. Congress is going to put up a candidate. So I think this is him panicking and joining the Congress before anything happens. Hardik Patel is a complete gone case. He went from 2016 when the national media was covering his speech to right now even Gujarati local media doesn't care about what he says. He has gone from that to like essentially a localized WhatsApp warrior. But the Congress's biggest problem in Gujarat is it has a few decent leaders in Gujarat who can actually pose a challenge. But the problem is they keep nominating the same 4 people who have been in Gujarat Congress leadership for the last 25 years. And when they are done, they outsource the dealings to Medha Patkar, Tista Setalwat. They'll come and do their politics there. You cannot in a state like Gujarat when you have activists coming and running, the ye karo, wo karo. So they'll need a face. And I don't see them nominating a face in a year. They could nominate a face and BJP then could face an issue or a serious election on hand. But if they won't, BJP is going to walk over again.
So I think Rahul Gandhi's makeover of the Congress as a far left NGO is gaining steam.
We must give credit to the original visionary Sonia Gandhi, who started with food security bill, NAC. She put in the roots with NAC, and then Rahul Gandhi took it further. And not only has he made it a far left, he's also made it as politically relevant as the far left, also closing to extinction.
Absolutely. As a former Young Turk takes oath today in UP, Jitin Prasad, who was from the Congress, checks all the boxes for the Congress essentially and left, one of the many who are leaving the party. But thank you everybody for joining us this evening, and I look forward to seeing the audience back on Tuesday, where we talk about the idols that are returning and what it took to get them back. So thank you so much. Like, share, subscribe, and have a great week. Wear your mask, stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We should